Yeah, good morning. Great to see you here. My name's Cullen. I'm the lead pastor. If I didn't get a chance to meet you, super glad that you're joined with us today. I also want to welcome those joining us online. About 10 years after we were married, we took a trip to an all-inclusive resort in Jamaica. Now, a little backstory on this, okay? So this was a makeup trip for our honeymoon, because when we first got married, me and Shelly, we didn't have much money at all. In fact, we had no money, okay? So we were broke, okay? And so our honeymoon, when we got married, consisted of this janky cabin in the woods. Like, seriously, that's what it was. And so I told her, I said, look, I promise you, one day, I will take you on a real honeymoon, maybe a long time from now, but we'll save up. I'll take you on a real honeymoon. And so we saved about 10 years, and we had some help from this other gift that was given to us. But I kept my word, all right? I kept my word. And so that's why we were on this trip to Jamaica. And when we arrived in Jamaica, we were ready for this beautiful vacation experience, this beautiful tropical experience that we had seen on the website, that we had seen, pictures of and in the brochures and everything like that. But our ride from the airport to the resort was not like anything that we had expected, okay? It was about an hour and a half, 2-hour ride from the airport to the resort, and we were driving through jungle-type territory, all right? We didn't see any sign of an ocean, no sign of water or beaches. It was like jungle, and then we were on some dirt roads, and roads that I'm not sure should be considered roads, and, some stuff like this, and we were seeing nothing of this tropical vacation, okay, that we had hoped for. And then my mind just started to go all over the place during that ride. I thought, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? Are we going to actually be on a vacation? Are we going to get to experience this? And then I wondered if the pictures on their website, were they real or were they fake? Were they messing with us? What's going on? And then I also thought, you know what? On this second honeymoon, I might be sleeping in the jungle, kind of like our first honeymoon. It's like in the woods, and now it's going to be in the jungle. Is this a theme? It just keeps going on and on and on. What is happening here? Until finally, all right, we came to this clearing, and then out of nowhere, it just opened up into this amazing scene that I had actually witnessed on the website. I had actually witnessed, this is what it is. It finally opened up. I began to see everything, all these pictures. There was the ocean. It was blue. It was turquoise. The white sand was there. The resort was there. The pools, all this kind of stuff. And so the whole experience, it met or probably exceeded our expectations. It was absolutely incredible. And so we had a fantastic second honeymoon. Now, at that moment, I realized there was something amazing that was just beyond what we were experiencing. Okay, we couldn't see it at the time. We were going through jungle. We're going through all this territory with the roads and all that. But there was something amazing beyond that. We just couldn't see it. We had to drive through, not around, not go over, but we had to drive through the jungle, the roads, the territory, the difficulties, in order to experience what was on the other side. And this is the idea that I want to talk about today, okay? There's a bright future beyond what you're facing right now, okay? There's a bright future beyond what you are facing right now. Now, what you're facing, it may look like that jungle. It may look like those roads. You may feel like, I can't see anything. What's happening? This is crazy. But I got to tell you, there is something bright beyond what you're walking through and what you're going through right now. And I get it. This probably raises some questions. You might be having a lot of stuff going through your mind as I even say that. How do I get through what I'm experiencing to access this bright future that you're talking about? How do I get through this? Okay, what do I do if I'm losing hope in the middle of this jungle? And what do I do if I don't have much faith that there actually is a bright future? And then what if I can't see anything bright right now? What if it is only dark and dim? Well, we're going to talk about many of these things in the context of our sermon series today, The Chosen. Maybe you've heard about this idea. It's like this series about the life and the ministry of Jesus. And today we're going to look at a story from the Gospel of John chapter 5, and we're going to look at this story in action. So check out the screen right now.
Shalom.
Me?
Yes.
Shalom.
I have a question for you.
For me. I don't have many answers, but I'm listening.
Do you want to be healed?
Who are you?
We'll get to that later. But my question remains.
Will you take me to the water? Look, I'm having a really bad day.
You've been having a bad day for a long time. So?
Sir, I have no one to help me into the water when it's stirred up. And when I do get close, the others step down in front of me. And so,
Look at me. Look at me. That's not what I asked. I'm not asking you about who's helping you, or who's not helping, or who's getting in your way. I'm asking about you.
I've tried.
For a long time, I know. And you don't want false hope again, I understand. But this pool, it has nothing for you. It means nothing. And you know it. But you're still here. Why?
I don't know.
You don't need this pool. You only need me. So, do you want to be healed? So let's go. Get up, pick up your mat, and walk.
I'm free to walk, like he said. Don't forget your bed.
Why does this matter?
Because you're not coming back here. That life is over. Everything changes now.
Isn't that awesome? Man, what an incredible story. Taken right from the Bible, you know. And let's read this, some of this story from John chapter 5 so we can understand it a little bit more. It says in John chapter 5, starting in verse 2, by the sheep gate in Jerusalem, there's a pool called Bethesda in Aramaic, which has 5 colonnades. Within these lay a large number of the disabled, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been disabled for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and realized he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to get well?" "Well, sir," the disabled man answered, "I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. but while I am coming, someone goes down ahead of me. Get up, Jesus told him. Pick up your mat and walk. Instantly, the man got well, picked up his mat, and started to walk. So there's this description of this unique kind of pool. It was a place where sick people would gather, people who had significant physical challenges, blind people, crippled people, people who were paralyzed and couldn't even necessarily move certain parts of their body. Now, I got to be honest with you, this is one of those strange stories that's in the Bible, and it's kind of hard to understand. And there's some theories about this pool that explains about the man wanting to get in the water in order to be healed. Now, one theory is some people thought that an angel would actually stir the waters, and it would bubble up when an angel would stir the waters. And then the first one in, after those bubbles would happen, after the angel stirred it, then that person would be healed. That was a theory that some thought. Well, some thought that this pool was connected to the worship of idols or false gods, other deities, and that there was demonic power that was trying to imitate the power of God by stirring some things up there, and it would produce false healings. Maybe people thought they were going to be healed, but they weren't really healed. So some people thought it was that. Some thought it was like this underwater reservoir or a spring that would bubble up, and you would see some bubbles come to the surface because of that. And then other people looked at it as a superstitious thing, hoping to find some kind of healing or relief from their condition in that water. And the belief that existed was if you were the first one to get into the pool when it bubbled up or when it was stirred, depending on the different translation you look at in the Bible, some uses the word bubbled up, some uses the word stirred, then they believed that you were actually going to be healed. Well, the most likely scenario here is that it was a pool that was fed by some underground springs that would bubble up from time to time. And if you think about it, for centuries, people have thought, they look at underwater springs or hot springs like that, and they think superstitiously about it, from bubbles that come up from the ground. So this past summer, our family, we took a vacation. One of the places we went was to Steamboat Springs in Colorado. And while we were there, we went to some natural hot springs, and it was really amazing. I mean, these were some kind of raw, natural, several different pools, pretty large pools. It was a really, really cool experience. We spent about 3 hours there one morning. It was actually a cool morning, and it was cloudy. It was overcast, and this just really made for the perfect scenario. And while we were there, it even started to rain, okay? It was a really cool dynamic that happened because the rain was coming down while we were in the hot springs. Again, so it was kind of cool outside here, cloudy, overcast, cool rain coming down, but we're in the warm water. You can see these dynamics, right? We're in the warm water, the rain's falling, and the bubbles and steam were coming up off the water. It was just incredible. It was amazing. So we kind of saw this bubble effect and some steam happening and everything. And I've been to some other hot springs as well in the past that were a lot smaller than Steamboat Springs. And I've read some materials that indicated how people thought that those springs carried superstitious or magical powers to help people with their sicknesses. And that's been kind of passed on through generations. Well, in much the same way, the Pool of Bethesda seems to have that same superstition that surrounded it. So that's why all these sick people would try to make their way to this pool in hopes of like accessing these quote unquote magical powers that may be there, because again, some people claim the spring water had magical powers. But we got to understand, this was a pretty dark situation that was here, because sick people were all over the place. So this wasn't like a party waiting to happen like we had in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. It wasn't this amazing experience that we have with our family. And no. This is a really dark situation at the Pool of Bethesda, but we're going to learn that there's a bright future beyond what you're facing, even if you're facing a dark situation today. But to reach that bright future, there's some things we need to see within our current situation. And we're going to talk about 3 things we need to see in our current situation so that we can experience a bright future. The first thing we need to see is this, that there is hope in our situation. There is hope. Everybody say hope. Hope. There's hope in your situation. One of the men lying there, of course, had been disabled for 38 years. And we understand that from the story, he was not able to walk. He was crippled. That seems hopeless. Now, Jesus could have been anywhere in Jerusalem. Could have been hanging out with the upper class. Could have been hanging out with rich people. Hanging out with famous people. Hanging out with politicians. Hanging out with people who could help him financially. Kind of fuel his mission. Could have been a lot of different places. But instead, he's here with some of the most desperate people on the planet. He's there in with some of the most needy people in one of the darkest areas. And he went out of his way to be with this group of people in this depressing scenario. And it seems that within this desperate group of people, he specifically selects one man who seems to have nobody that cares about him in any way, shape, or form. We know that because when Jesus asked if he wanted to get well, the guy said, "There's nobody here to help me." He's like, "I got nobody. There's nobody in my life. Nobody cares about me. I'm here all alone." And it seems like this crippled man had been abandoned maybe for 38 years, which probably felt like an eternity to him. He appears to be all alone in life. Sits there by himself, hoping for something to happen. I mean, this man's hopeless in every way. He feels it physically, of course. He feels it emotionally. He feels it mentally. He feels it relationally because he doesn't have these relationships. And Jesus goes directly to him. Jesus didn't even comment on the man's superstitious thoughts. He just kind of bypassed that. And he said, "Stand up, pick up your mat, and walk." Instantly, the man was healed. He rolled up his sleeping mat that he'd been lying on for so many years, and he began to walk. Jesus provides hope in this situation when things looked completely hopeless. The crippled man couldn't see life beyond the mat or the pool or the hopeless situation that he was in from a physical perspective, an emotional perspective, a relational perspective. His condition had actually become his identity. As bad as his condition was, as terrible as it was, it probably felt safe for him because that's what he knew. His problem had become who he was in his own mind. When we feel hopeless about something, if we're not careful, it can seep into every area of our lives. And that thing can end up defining us. It can define our outlook on life. It can define our perspective of things, our perspective of ourselves. Everything we do and see is marred by the hopelessness in the situation that's defining us for that moment of life in that season that we're walking through. All we can see is the hopelessness. We can't seem to see anything else. Maybe you've heard of this story. It goes like this, a story of a man who was trapped in his house during a flood. And this man had already experienced a really bad year with all kind of unexpected pain and trauma. And he was feeling hopeless and helpless, all the above. And he didn't know what to do when the flood, a disaster, hit his town. So he prayed to God for help. "God, would you help me? I need some help." Well, the water began to rise in his house, and his neighbors saw what was going on in their community, and so they decided they were going to evacuate, go to somewhere safe. And so they asked him, they said, "Hey, we have this vehicle. Why don't you jump in with us? We'll take you to safety. We'll get you out of here. Why don't you just come with us?" Okay, but the man was so overwhelmed with hopelessness that it just kind of became his identity. And he yelled back, no, I think I'll just stay here. I'm kind of waiting for God to save me. I know he'll do something. So neighbor drove off, evacuated, went to a safe place. Well, the water kept rising. And so he had to climb up to the roof of his house. It was getting really high. But this time a boat came by, filled with some people. And they said, "Hey, I see you up there. Hey, we'll throw you a life jacket. Just hang on to that. We'll pull you in. You can get in our boat. We'll go to safety." But again, this man was just so overwhelmed with hopelessness and almost felt comfortable staying in this hopeless situation, although he was being offered a rescue. He just yelled back. He's like, no, just stay here. I'm waiting for God to do something. I've been praying to him. So the people in the boat just kind of shook their heads, and they just said, "All right, we'll go on." So they went on. Well, finally, by this time, the floodwaters were right up to the top of the house where he was sitting. And a helicopter came over. They saw him. They lowered down this ladder, and they yelled with a microphone, megaphone or something, or some speaker system, and they said, hey, grab onto the ladder, climb up. We'll help you. We'll rescue you. But by this time, the man was so comfortable in his hopelessness that he refused the helicopter ride. And he just said, hey, I'm waiting on God to save me. I know he'll do something. Helicopter just left. Well, tragically, the man passed away from the flood. And when he got to heaven, he asked God, he said, why didn't you save me from my hopeless situation? Why didn't you do so? Why didn't you do that? God, why'd you let me drown? And God replied, he said, I sent you a car. I sent you a boat. I sent you a helicopter. But you refused all of them. He said, what more could I possibly do? You know, just like that man, we can become more comfortable in hopelessness than being free from hopelessness. So easy. We can become more comfortable in hopelessness than being free from hopelessness. We simply refuse God's activity and involvement because hopelessness can be more comfortable to us than being free and having a new life. And when this happens, we completely miss the hand of God operating in our life. We can't see what God is doing. We can't see his activity. We can't even see his involvement. And if we're not careful, hopelessness can gradually move into every area of our life, and it consume us at every area of our life as well. And this is just what happened with the crippled man at the pool of Bethesda. He couldn't see beyond his hopelessness. Because when Jesus asked him the question, would you like to get well? The man said in John chapter 5, verse 7, we can put that back on the screen. He said, I can't. For I have no one to put me into the pool when the water bubbles up. Somebody else always gets there ahead of me. He could only see things through his hopelessness. It all went back to his hopeless condition, which actually defined his life. Jesus wanted to see if he wanted to break free from what was defining him, what seemed hopeless, the thing that was holding him back. And that's why Jesus asked him this question. Jesus wasn't being mean. He was asking him this question. Jesus was ready to do a miracle in his life, and he also wanted to challenge the man's comfort zone. Because although it was a terrible condition, it was bad to be paralyzed for 38 years, but the man was comfortable in that hopelessness. Why? Because it was familiar. The hopelessness was familiar, and sometimes we stick with what's hopeless because it's familiar, because it's comfortable. And because it's familiar, we lean more towards that hopelessness over the freedom that Jesus has to offer us. Is there something hopelessness? Or is there something hopeless that maybe you're sticking with in your life? Something hopeless that you're allowing to hang around because it's familiar and it's comfortable, but yet Jesus wants to set you free from that today? Sometimes it seems scarier to accept freedom and embrace a new identity, even though it's good. It can often seem easier to stay connected to what's hopeless, even though it's harming us. I mean, some things I think about, what about maybe a relationship that you may be in, and you know it's going to end in hopelessness, or you sense this is going to kind of a hopeless situation, but you're not willing to release that because it's familiar, because it's comfortable, but Jesus is saying, man, I got something better for you here. Release that. Release it. Or maybe a struggle. There's a struggle with some stuff you turn to in times of stress, and you know that pathway leads to hopelessness, but it's familiar to you and it's comfortable, and you haven't been willing to let it go. Or maybe, you know, there's some bitterness on the inside. It could have been bitterness that's built up. I just sense this in my spirit. Right now, I just sense there's somebody here. So this is, I believe, a word for somebody that there's some bitterness you're hanging on to. Not even just from one person, but there's some bitterness that it's happened here and there and here and there. And this bitterness has accumulated in your life, and it's become so familiar to you. Yeah, it's hopeless, but it's become familiar to you. It's kind of become part of who you are. And it's been comfortable, and you hadn't been willing to really break free from all that. But today God is saying, let it go. He has a new life for you. He has something for you, and he doesn't want you to walk around bitter. He's not rebuking you today. He's loving you and wanting you to step out of that situation into something that is hopeful, not hopeless. Maybe there's a limiting belief that you believed about yourself. You know it ends in hopelessness, but boy, it's just comfortable to believe that about yourself. It feels safe, so you just keep it around. Or maybe a failure that you've let define you. Oh, you know that if I think about it, yeah, it's a hopeless thing I'm allowing to define my life, but it's comfortable, it's familiar, so you just let it hang around your life. You know, we can hold on to those things and more because we're finding comfort in what's familiar. But Jesus is asking us the same question. Do you want to get well? Do you want to get well? Do you want to get free from hopelessness? From a destructive identity, from a situation maybe that keeps hanging around over your head? Or would you rather stay in your comfort zone of what's familiar and be defined by that problem or be defined by that hopelessness? Don't let the fear of the unfamiliar hold you back from what God has for you. Don't let it hold you back from a miracle or from a brand new life that God wants you to experience. One minute, the crippled man had no hope, but the next minute, his life was completely changed, all because he was willing to accept a new life and identity by breaking free from his comfort zone in that situation. When he picked up his mat, he was picking up a brand new life and a brand new identity. It's like, I'm going on to something different. But yet he had no idea what that would look like, and that was the unfamiliar part. He didn't know what his new life was going to look like because for the past 38 years, he'd been on a mat. He'd been begging. He'd been pleading. He's alone. He's suffering. But now he was walking with his mat in his hands. Hey, what would this look like for him? His life, his relationships. Maybe he'd get a job now. He didn't have a job. Maybe everything's going to change. Where would he live? I mean, there's lots of unknowns, a lot of questions, okay? But now he's free. He was no longer hopeless because Jesus had given him a brand new life and a brand new identity, and that's what mattered most. Today, you can also pick up that thing. You can pick up that thought, that idea, that habit, that barrier, the bitterness that may have been holding you back. You can put it under your arm and step into something brand new, just like that crippled man. You can walk into something brand new that God has for you. Why? Because there is hope in your situation. There's a bright future just beyond what you're facing. The second thing we need to see in our current situation so that we can experience this bright future, number 2, there is faith in your situation. Everybody say faith. So we got to understand there is faith in our situation. Now, there's times when we feel like we just can't take another step. We can't even fight. We can't even figure it out. And that's what this man was experiencing. This crippled man, I think he was at the lowest of his lows. He didn't have anything to stand on. There was no evidence of faith anywhere in his life. I think he was faithless. Okay? He had discounted every possibility of his situation changing. He had no faith to show. He was beaten down. He was discouraged. Okay? He was completely just demoralized. So what happened next? Well, something unique took place. Jesus actually let him lean on his faith when the man had no faith of his own. Jesus stepped in and he used his own faith when the man was at his lowest point and he had nothing left to give. So when you feel too weak to fight, use the faith of Jesus. When you feel like you got no faith to fight with, use the faith of Jesus. Now, I want you to kind of get an idea as to what we mean by that. Watch this story of how one person used the strength of another person at their weakest point to walk through this challenge. Let's check this out.
The girls' cross-country team at Arkansas's Batesville High School knows how to finish strong. For Kaylee Montgomery, in the final race of her high school career, that looked a little different. The senior, approaching the finish line at the state championships, noticed her competitor doubled over just short of the finish line after her legs gave out in the final stretch.
She was on the ground. I just saw her, and my first instinct and just my first thought that came to my mind was that I have to help her and that I can't leave her.
Kaylee, exhausted from pushing through a 3.1-mile course at race pace, had been chasing down her PR from the year before. Her dad recording this video and expecting his daughter's typical big finish to the end. But instead of picking up her pace, she decided to pick up her competitor, Julia. She says her strength in that moment didn't come from her training.
if I was down and falling, Jesus wouldn't pass me by. And so that was kind of what was going through my head, that I couldn't leave her, pass her by.
Kaylee and Julia had never met, but in a powerful moment, the two created a team of their own.
She started praying over me, and it really did give me strength to finish and just try to get up. And then every now and then I would look back up and see the finish line getting closer, and she would say, we're almost there, which was really encouraging.
The video of the finish getting over 3 million views on TikTok. Kaylee's dad, Pastor Robert, proud that his little girl is making strides to uplift others one step at a time.
Isn't that a cool story? Julia had no strength of her own to cross the finish line. She literally used the strength and the faith of Kaylee, who was a competitor in the state championships. I mean, this is such an unlikely situation. She used the strength and the faith of Kaylee to help cross the finish line because she didn't have that strength or that faith on her own. And this was actually a big, big deal. And we see it from the story. Kaylee's a believer, so she literally was leaning on her faith in Jesus. Now, this is a visual example, okay, of how we can use the faith of Jesus when we feel absolutely depleted in life. When you're in a Julia moment, you may be on the ground like Julia was. She couldn't even move. She couldn't even get up. You got no faith of your own to move forward, just like Julia, lying on the ground. That's when you tap into the faith of Jesus. Just like Julia tapped into the faith of Kaylee. You see, Jesus can help carry you across the finish line. We've got to get that picture in our minds. It's a beautiful picture. When Jesus asked the crippled man that question, would you like to get well? It also helped to get his attention focused on Jesus. That man, he needed to get his attention off of his situation. He needed to get his attention off of himself and onto something else, and on the person of Jesus. So Jesus was attempting to elevate his focus on the one who actually is faith. I mean, there's a lot of principles in the Bible that show us how we need to fight with our own faith. Absolutely. I mean, I talk about that. We look at that and we believe that. But in this case, it's obvious that the crippled man didn't have any faith because he didn't even know Jesus. He's like, who is this guy, right? So Jesus was getting him to focus on the one who is faith by shifting his focus off of himself, off of his situation, and onto Jesus. So are you in a situation where it feels like you can't even reach down to exercise your own faith? Maybe you feel too weak to fight. Yeah, then shift your focus on Jesus. He is your faith. Simply lean on the faith of Jesus for your miracle. Lean on the faith of Jesus for your breakthrough. Lean on the faith of Jesus for your answer. When you have nothing left to give, Jesus does. When you have no faith of your own, use His. Jesus is your faith. He is your faith. There is faith in your situation because Jesus is in your situation. There's a bright future beyond what you're facing. The third and final thing we need to see in our current situation so we can experience that bright future. Number 3, there is grace in our situation. Everybody say grace. There's grace in our situation. Over the long period of time that this man lived with this problem, he thought his only chance of being healed was on a first-come, first-served basis. So when Jesus asked him if he wanted to get well, we already know his answer, okay? We've looked at it a couple times. It's up there again. I can't. I got no one to put me in the pool when the water bubbles up. Somebody else always gets there ahead of me. We know his answer was kind of based on what seemed like a myth of superstition that surrounded the pool, which allegedly brought healing to the first person to jump in. In his mind, if he wasn't the first person, he was left out. And because he couldn't move and he had nobody to help him, he was always left out of the pool. But what he didn't yet realize is that he was actually talking to the true healer at this moment. And the true healer didn't operate off of a first-come, first-served basis, off of this principle of favoritism, but he operated out of grace. You see, God operates out of grace, not favoritism. Jesus operates out of grace, not favoritism. And the truth is, none of us deserve what God has to offer, okay? But he gives it to us anyhow through the person of Jesus. That's grace. Aren't you glad that God gives us things we don't deserve because of Jesus, because of his grace? It's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's amazing. And so when Jesus performed the miracle of healing in this man's life, Jesus did it out of grace, not on a first come, first served basis out of favoritism. When Jesus does a work or a miracle in your life, he also does it out of grace, not out of a first come, first served basis. A first come, first served principle means that one person wins and everybody else loses. It's a principle of favoritism. And I think we often have this mentality that it works that way when we come to Jesus. We think that only special people are going to receive blessings, or only certain people are going to receive miracles, only certain people are going to, get healed or get their answers to prayer or get this kind of favor from God. And we often think that those things it's not necessarily for everybody, especially for me, probably for that person or person over there. Certain people, but not for me. We often think that God plays favorites and he has favoritism so that only one person wins and everybody else loses. And we tend to feel or think like we end up on the losing side. There's a game show. It's breaking some new ground right now. It's called Beast Games on Amazon Prime. Anybody seen that? Beast Games, anybody? Yeah, a number of you have seen Beast Games. So it's created by Jimmy Donaldson, mega popular YouTuber. The winner of these games receives $5 million. It's never before been done. The largest cash prize in television history. I think it garnered like over 50 million views in 25 days when it started to be shown on Amazon Prime. So this whole game started with 1,000 contestants, all of whom were hoping to win the $5 million. But gradually, of course, people are disqualified and they get out of the game, so they have to leave. And I was watching it. It's interesting how, some people, when they get out, they start crying. There's like weeping. There's like, some are angry. They're so mad. I can't believe this. And then others, they're like in disbelief, like, they're in shock. I can't believe what's going on. But at the end of the day, only one person gets the $5 million. Everybody wants it, but one person gets it. The 999 go home disappointed. Nothing to show for it, but only one gets that $5 million. Well, this is a lot like the situation at the pool of Bethesda. Everybody wanted it. Everybody wants to get in that pool. Everybody wants that healing, so to speak, whatever that would mean, for that situation. But only one person could have it, so their superstition told them. But here's what we need to understand. God doesn't operate that way. God operates out of grace, which is available for everyone. It doesn't matter what your culture, the culture that you come from. It doesn't matter what your ethnicity. It doesn't matter how you vote. It doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter whether you're wealthy or you're poor. None of those things matter. It's not about favoritism. It's about grace, which is available to everyone. Everyone. That means that everyone can receive a miracle. That means everyone can experience what God wants to do in their life. That means everyone can experience God's blessings. Everyone can experience God's favor. Everyone can experience God's promotion. Everyone can experience his direction, his healing, his freedom, his joy, the answers to prayer. Are you getting where I'm coming from today? Everyone can experience that. That's a beauty of grace. Again, aren't you grateful for God's grace? It's wonderful. And let me say that when Jesus performed that miracle, he also showed that he was master over that pool. He was master over any superstition that may have been taking place there in that moment. Can I just tell you something? You don't need superstition. A lot of people think, I need superstition. Got to have this thing, and I got to have this. You don't need superstition. You don't need tarot cards. You don't need fortune tellers or fortune cookies. I'm not saying, some people I'm not saying fortune cookies, but this is what my lot is in life. No, we don't need stuff. We don't need fortune cookies. We don't need fortune tellers. We don't need somebody to read our palm. You don't need a Ouija board to tell you what to do. You don't need a magic 8 ball to help you make decisions in life. You don't need crystals for power or for healing or for direction. You don't need astrology for guidance. What you need is Jesus, because Jesus is master over all those things. That's what we need. It's a bright future, just beyond what you're facing, even if what you're facing doesn't seem bright right now. There is hope. There is faith. There is grace. We can tap into those things right now, here today. Let's all stand to our feet, and as we do, I'm going to ask that we not leave here in this moment. I want to